The mist hung low over the cemetery that morning, wrapping around weathered tombstones like ghostly fingers. For 30 years, Harold had been the gravedigger at Oakwood, his shovel the final companion for countless souls. He noticed her again today, the small girl with braided hair, leaving folded notes at the forgotten grave in the eastern corner. She'd been coming for months, but always ran when he approached. Harold wondered what secrets those notes held, what words connected the living child to the long-dead stranger. The cemetery kept many stories beneath its soil, but this one tugged at him differently. Something about the girl's solemn ritual felt like a key to a lock he didn't know existed. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in this mysterious journey. Harold's life had been measured in graves, 6 feet deep, 4 feet wide, the dimensions as familiar to him as his own calloused hands. At 67, his back curved slightly from decades of digging, his face weathered like the oldest stones in Oakwood Cemetery. The locals called him Gravedigger Harold, rarely bothering with his surname, Mercer. He was as much a fixture of the cemetery as the ancient oak that stood sentinel at its center. Before the cemetery, Harold had been a teacher, until the accident that took his wife and daughter 28 years ago. The drunk driver walked away with community service while Harold buried his family on a rainy Tuesday. He'd taken the gravedigger position a month later, finding strange comfort in creating perfect resting places for others. The irony wasn't lost on him. He couldn't save his family, but he could ensure others were laid to rest with dignity. Harold's simple goal each day was to maintain the cemetery with the respect it deserved and perhaps, someday, understand why he'd been left behind. The cemetery board, however, had recently appointed a new director, Richard Thornton, a man who viewed Oakwood as a business opportunity rather than sacred ground. "We're implementing efficiency measures," Thornton announced during the staff meeting, his expensive suit out of place among the groundskeepers. Starting with outdated positions, Harold felt eyes turned toward him. "Modern equipment eliminates the need for traditional gravediggers," Thornton continued, displaying charts on his tablet. "Mr. Mercer's position will be phased out by month's end. But Harold knows every inch of this place," protested Mabel from the office. Thornton smiled thinly. "Sentiment doesn't pay bills. Besides, he's well past retirement age. Probably can't even read the new digital plot maps we're installing." Laughter rippled through the younger staff members. Harold stared at his hands, the dirt permanently etched in their creases. 30 years of service reduced to a punchline about his age and literacy. As the meeting dispersed, Harold walked alone through the misty grounds, past the eastern corner where the mysterious girl left her notes. Perhaps they both shared something. Messages that no one cared to understand, devotion to memories others deemed worthless. For the first time, Harold decided he would read one of those notes, regardless of rules or boundaries. The following morning, Harold arrived at the cemetery to find Richard Thornton waiting by the maintenance shed, clipboard in hand and 2 young men in matching polo shirts standing beside him. "Ah, Mercer. Just the man I wanted to see." Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "These gentlemen are from Evergreen Cemetery Solutions. They'll be shadowing you today to learn the grounds." Harold gripped his shovel tighter. "I wasn't informed of any training. No need for formalities at this stage. They're simply observing before the transition." Thornton turned to the young men. "Harold here is a relic of the old ways. Fascinating to watch, like visiting a living museum." The men snickered as Harold silently gathered his tools. Throughout the morning, they followed him, documenting his routines on tablets, occasionally whispering and laughing. When Harold knelt to clear debris from a weathered headstone, one nudged the other. "Look at that, he's talking to it," the taller one muttered. "Probably thinks the dead can hear him." Harold had indeed been murmuring a greeting to Mrs. Eleanor Winters, who'd been laid to rest in 1987. He'd known her in life, she taught with his wife. But he said nothing to defend himself, continuing his work as the men's mockery hung in the air. By afternoon, Thornton had escalated his campaign. He gathered staff and board members for what he called a modernization tour, bringing them to the section Harold was tending. "As you can see," Thornton announced loudly, gesturing toward Harold, "our current methods are painfully outdated. Mr. Mercer here still uses hand tools when our competitors employ mini excavators that complete the same work in 1/10 of the time." Harold kept his eyes down, focusing on clearing weeds from around a family plot. "The digital mapping system will replace the mental record-keeping that Mr. Mercer relies on," Thornton continued. "No more guesswork or forgotten plots." Mabel from the office spoke up. "Harold's never forgotten a plot in 30 years. Anecdotal evidence isn't data, Thornton dismissed. And speaking of data, our analysis shows that his position costs us nearly twice what the new system will. As the group moved on, Harold heard Thornton add, "Plus, we won't have to worry about him frightening visitors with his eccentric behaviors." Harold's hands trembled slightly as he continued working. The weight of 3 decades of dedication suddenly rendered worthless. The final humiliation came at day's end. Harold entered the small office to clock out and found his personal effects, photos of his wife and daughter, a carved wooden box his father had given him, even his coffee mug, packed in a cardboard box. "We are accelerating the transition," Thornton announced, not looking up from his computer. The board agreed there's no point dragging this out. "Your final day will be Friday, not the end of the month." Harold stood silently, the room suddenly feeling airless. "Oh, and we'll need you to train your replacements on the eastern section tomorrow." Apparently, there are some unmarked graves that aren't in any records. Thornton finally looked up. Unless, of course, those are just stories you've invented to make yourself seem indispensable. Harold picked up the box of his belongings. "The eastern section has 17 unmarked graves, Mr. Thornton. Civil War soldiers, mostly. Their names are recorded in the leather ledger in the archive room, the one you've never opened." Thornton's smirk faltered. "I can also tell you the names of every person buried here since 1993. I know which families visit regularly, and which graves haven't seen flowers in decades." Harold's voice remained quiet but firm. "And I know exactly what's buried beneath this cemetery besides bodies." He turned to leave, adding, "Some things aren't in your digital systems, Mr. Thornton. Some things never will be." From the cemetery's edge, Mrs. Blackwood, head of the town council and cemetery benefactor, observed the exchange. Her eyes narrowed as she made a note in her leather-bound journal. "Interesting," she murmured. "Very interesting indeed." Harold left the office with his box of belongings, his steps measured and deliberate. The evening shadows stretched across the cemetery, painting the headstones in amber light. For 30 years, he had been the keeper of this place, not just of the grounds, but of its stories, its secrets, and the sacred trust of those who rested here. He placed the box in his truck but didn't leave. Instead, he walked to the eastern section, where the oldest graves lay. The unmarked Civil War soldiers' plots were barely visible depressions in the earth, but Harold knew each one. He knelt beside one such depression and placed his hand on the ground. "They want to forget you," he whispered. "But I remember." As twilight deepened, Harold made a decision. If Thornton wanted to erase decades of careful stewardship with his digital systems and mini-excavators, then perhaps it was time to reveal what the cemetery truly held. The next morning, Harold arrived early, before the office staff. He went directly to the archive room, a small dusty space that Thornton had dismissed as wasted square footage in his modernization plans. From a hidden panel behind the oldest filing cabinet, Harold retrieved a leather-bound journal that predated even his time at the cemetery. The journal contained hand-drawn maps of the grounds, noting not just graves but underground springs, unstable soil areas, and places where the bedrock rose close to the surface. Information passed from one caretaker to the next for over a century. Information that no digital system could capture because no one had thought to ask. Harold tucked the journal into his jacket just as he heard Thornton's voice outside, speaking loudly on his phone. "Yes, we'll have the eastern section cleared and ready for the new premium plots by next month. The old graves there, unmarked, unclaimed. We'll document what we can, but progress can't wait for sentimentality." Harold's jaw tightened. The eastern section wasn't just home to forgotten soldiers. It was unsuitable for new burials due to seasonal flooding from an underground spring. Any new graves, there would be a desecration waiting to happen. When Thornton entered with 2 young men in matching polo shirts bearing the logo of a landscaping company, Harold was calmly reviewing the old ledger of names. "Ah, Mercer. Good. These gentlemen will be handling the grounds maintenance going forward. Show them the eastern section as we discussed." Harold nodded politely. "Of course. I was just refreshing my memory on some details they'll need to know." Thornton glanced dismissively at the ancient ledger. "That won't be necessary. We've mapped everything digitally now." "Everything?" Harold raised an eyebrow. "Even the spring beneath the eastern slope that floods every March." Thornton blinked. "What spring?" "Or the section near the oak grove where the bedrock is just 18 inches below the surface. Makes for difficult digging." Harold closed the ledger gently. "But I'm sure your digital system captured all that." The two landscapers exchanged uncertain glances. Those are just old caretaker myths, Thornton said, his confidence wavering slightly. Modern ground-penetrating radar has given us everything we need. Harold smiled thinly. Then you won't mind if I share these myths with your new team? For historical interest only, of course. Before Thornton could object, Harold led the men outside. As they walked the grounds, he pointed out features invisible to the untrained eye, subtle dips indicating settled graves, areas where certain wildflowers grew indicating specific soil conditions, the barely perceptible rise of bedrock. This whole section, Harold said, gesturing to the eastern slope where Thornton planned his premium plots, floods every spring. Water comes up from below, not down from above. You can't see it now in August, but by March, you'll have a mess on your hands. One of the landscapers, a man named Rodriguez with calloused hands and intelligent eyes, asked, "How do you know where it's safe to dig?" Harold pulled out the journal. 130 years of observation. Every caretaker before me kept notes, added to the knowledge. I did the same. Rodriguez leafed through the pages with growing respect. This is incredible. The detail. Mr. Rodriguez. Thornton's voice cut through their conversation. He strode toward them, face flushed. I believe I made it clear that Mr. Mercer was to show you the plot locations, not fill your head with outdated folklore. Sir, Rodriguez began, this information could save us a lot of trouble. What would save trouble is following the plan as outlined, Thornton snapped. Mr. Mercer, I'll take that book. It's cemetery property. Harold held the journal close. Actually, this belongs to the line of caretakers. It's been passed down since 1891. Everything on these grounds belongs to the cemetery board now, Thornton insisted, reaching for the book. Is there a problem here? The voice came from behind them, measured and authoritative. Mrs. Blackwood approached, her elegant figure silhouetted against the morning sun. At 78, she moved with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime making difficult decisions and standing by them. Mrs. Blackwood, Thornton straightened immediately, his tone shifting to deferential. Just a small disagreement about documentation. Nothing to concern yourself with. On the contrary, she replied, the proper documentation of this cemetery concerns me greatly. My family has been buried here for 5 generations. She turned to Harold. Mr. Mercer, is that the caretaker's journal I've heard about? Harold nodded. Yes, ma'am. May I? She extended her hand. Harold passed her the journal, which she opened with reverent care. My grandfather mentioned this. He said the second caretaker, was it Abernathy, saved several graves from being washed out in the flood of 1912 because of his knowledge. Yes, ma'am. Abernathy diverted the water from the eastern spring. Mrs. Blackwood turned to Thornton. And you were planning to build new plots in the eastern section? Thornton shifted uncomfortably. Our surveys indicate. Your surveys, Mrs. Blackwood interrupted, cannot replace generations of direct observation. My grandfather would have called that book learning without wisdom. She closed the journal and handed it back to Harold. The board meeting tomorrow. I believe you were planning to finalize Mr. Mercer's termination? Yes, as part of our modernization. I'll be attending, she said simply. And I'll be bringing some historical perspective to the discussion. Thornton's face paled slightly. As the cemetery's largest benefactor and a respected town elder, Mrs. Blackwood's opinion carried significant weight. In the meantime, she continued, perhaps Mr. Mercer could work with your new team to document the information in this journal properly. A collaboration of traditional knowledge and modern methods. It wasn't a suggestion. Of course, Thornton managed, his earlier bravado deflated. As Mrs. Blackwood prepared to leave, she paused beside Harold. My husband always said you knew this place better than anyone alive. I believe he was right. She patted his arm gently. Some things shouldn't be forgotten, Mr. Mercer. After she departed, Thornton quickly excused himself, muttering about paperwork. Harold was left with Rodriguez and his colleague. So, Rodriguez said with a slight smile, about that eastern spring. For the rest of the day, Harold walked the grounds with the two men, sharing knowledge that no digital system could capture, the way certain trees indicated water levels, how the soil changed texture in specific areas, which families had requested special care for their loved ones' graves. By late afternoon, Rodriguez had filled a notebook with observations and questions. This is going to take more than a day to learn, he admitted. Harold nodded. It took me years. As the sun began to set, Harold noticed Mrs. Blackwood's car still parked near the cemetery office. Through the window, he could see her engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with Thornton, her finger occasionally tapping the desk for emphasis. Harold smiled slightly. The cemetery had its own way of protecting itself through the people who truly understood its value. Not as real estate or a business opportunity, but as sacred ground where memories lived on through those who tended them. That night, as Harold drove home, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for today, the stories beneath the ground remained safe in his keeping. What about you? Have you ever visited a historic cemetery or memorial ground? Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. I'd love to know which parts of the world still honor these sacred spaces. The next morning, Harold found an envelope on his windshield containing old photographs of Thornton's grandfather illegally relocating graves decades ago. A note read, "They're hiding something bigger. Meet me tonight." Someone else died for knowing. Harold stared at the photographs in his trembling hands, the morning sun casting long shadows across the cemetery grounds. The black and white images showed Thornton's grandfather supervising the illegal relocation of graves, a secret that could destroy the family's reputation and explain their desperate push to modernize and pave over certain sections of the cemetery. The note's ominous warning echoed in his mind. Someone else died for knowing. Throughout the day, Harold went through his duties mechanically, his mind racing with possibilities. Who had left the envelope? What were the Thorntons hiding? By afternoon, he made his decision. He would meet this mysterious informant, but he wouldn't go unprepared. Harold called Mrs. Blackwood first. "I need your help," he said simply, explaining what he'd found. "My husband suspected something like this," she replied after a long pause. "The eastern section, where they're so eager to build that new mausoleum, there's always been rumors." Next, he contacted Rodriguez. "You said you wanted to learn about this place. Tonight might be your chance to learn more than you bargained for." As dusk fell, Harold parked his truck behind a maintenance shed, out of sight from the main road. Mrs. Blackwood arrived shortly after, followed by Rodriguez, who brought his colleague Jenkins, a former forensic photographer. "I brought these," Mrs. Blackwood said, producing a set of old cemetery maps from her leather portfolio. They show the original plots before the renovations in 1978. Harold spread the maps across the hood of his truck. The note said to meet here. He pointed to a spot near the eastern spring. "It's the oldest section, dating back to the 1850s. That's where Thornton wants to build the new mausoleum complex," Rodriguez noted. "The soil samples I took yesterday showed unusual disturbances for a site that's supposedly been undisturbed for decades." Jenkins adjusted his camera. "If we're documenting potential grave desecration, we need to be methodical." Harold nodded grimly. "We need to be careful. If someone died over this." They moved through the cemetery like shadows, flashlights pointed downward to avoid detection. The eastern section lay beyond a small rise, partially hidden by ancient oak trees. As they approached, Harold felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Look," Rodriguez whispered, pointing to fresh tire tracks cutting across the grass. "Someone's here already," Harold murmured. They crested the small hill and froze. Below, in the hollow near the spring, two figures moved among the gravestones. One was digging, while the other held a light. A small excavator sat nearby, its engine silent but ready. "That's Thornton," Mrs. Blackwood whispered, recognizing the taller figure. "And his son." Harold's heart pounded. "Jenkins, start documenting." Rodriguez, circle around to the left. "Mrs. Blackwood, stay here. I'm going to approach from the right." As they separated, Harold heard the distinct sound of metal striking stone. He crept closer, using the gravestones for cover. From his new position, he could see what the Thorntons were doing. They were removing small markers, digging shallow holes, and placing something inside before covering them again. "They're hiding evidence," Harold realized. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind him. Harold turned to find himself face to face with a security guard he'd never seen before. One of Thornton's new hires. "Mr. Mercer," the guard said coldly, raising a flashlight to Harold's face. "Mr. Thornton said you might be snooping around. You're trespassing after hours." "I work here," Harold replied steadily. "Not anymore. Board voted this afternoon. Emergency session." The guard's free hand moved toward his belt. "Now, you need to leave." Before Harold could respond, Mrs. Blackwood's voice rang out from the darkness. "I believe you're mistaken. The board made no such decision." The guard turned, momentarily distracted. Harold seized the opportunity, knocking the flashlight from the man's hand. They grappled briefly before Rodriguez appeared, helping Harold subdue the guard. Below, the commotion had alerted the Thorntons. "What's going on up there?" the elder Thornton shouted, his voice echoing among the graves. "It's over, Thornton," Harold called back, his voice stronger than he felt. "We know what you're doing." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then came the sound of the excavator's engine roaring to life. "He's going to destroy the evidence," Rodriguez shouted. Harold ran down the hill, Mrs. Blackwood and Jenkins close behind. The excavator's bucket raised menacingly, poised above one of the oldest gravestones. "Stop!" Harold planted himself directly in the machine's path. "This is sacred ground." Through the excavator's cab window, Thornton's face was a mask of fury and fear. "You don't understand what's at stake, Mercer. My grandfather made deals, arrangements that kept this town afloat during the Depression. Some secrets need to stay buried. Not like this," Harold replied, standing his ground even as the machine inched forward. "Whatever's here, these people deserve their rest." For a terrible moment, Harold thought Thornton might actually run him down. Then, blue lights flashed at the cemetery entrance. Someone, perhaps Jenkins or Mrs. Blackwood, had called the police. Thornton cut the engine. His son tried to flee, was quickly intercepted by Rodriguez. As officers approached, Mrs. Blackwood stepped forward, her dignity undiminished by the evening's events. "Officers, we've discovered evidence of grave desecration and what appears to be an attempt to conceal it," she stated calmly. "Mr. Jenkins has photographic documentation." As the police began securing the scene, an officer approached Harold. "Sir, we found something you should see." Near the spring, partially unearthed by the Thorntons' digging, lay a small metal box. Inside were documents, property deeds, letters, and photographs showing Thornton's grandfather with several prominent town officials standing over what appeared to be a mass grave. "My God," Mrs. Blackwood whispered. "The influenza epidemic of 1918. There were rumors that some of the victims were buried improperly, immigrant workers from the mill. The town officials claimed they'd been given individual burials." Harold stared at the evidence of a century-old cover-up. The Thornton family had been hiding the secret for generations, relocating individual graves to conceal the mass burial beneath. As dawn broke over the cemetery, Harold faced a difficult choice. The discovery would devastate many families in town who believed their ancestors had received proper burials. It would tarnish the cemetery's reputation and possibly lead to years of painful exhumations and reburials. Yet the truth had been hidden too long, and those forgotten souls deserved recognition. "What will you do?" Rodriguez asked quietly, standing beside him as the police continued their work. Harold looked across the grounds he had tended for decades, to the place where a little girl had once left notes for her mother, where Mrs. Blackwood visited her husband, where generations of the town's history lay beneath the soil. "We honor them," he said finally. "All of them. No matter how painful the truth might be." The investigation that followed shook Millfield to its core. As forensic teams carefully excavated the area, they confirmed what the documents had revealed: a mass grave containing the remains of over 40 immigrant workers who had succumbed to the influenza epidemic of 1918. The Thornton family's century-old deception unraveled with each passing day. Mayor Thornton and his son were charged with multiple counts of grave desecration, tampering with evidence, and attempted destruction of historical remains. The family's reputation, built on generations of wealth and influence, crumbled as quickly as the facade they had maintained. In the courthouse, packed with townspeople and media, Harold watched as Mayor Thornton stood before the judge. His shoulders slumped, the arrogance drained from his face. "Your Honor," Thornton's voice wavered, "my actions were meant to protect my family's legacy. I was only doing what my father and grandfather had done before me." The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, leaned forward. "Mr. Thornton, a legacy built on deception is no legacy at all. These people, these human beings, were denied dignity in death because your family valued reputation over humanity." The sentencing came swiftly. Mayor Thornton received 5 years in prison, though many felt it insufficient for a century of deception. His son, facing lesser charges, received 18 months. More devastating to the Thorntons was the financial restitution. The family fortune would be substantially diminished to fund the proper identification and reburial of the victims, as well as a memorial to be erected in their honor. As Thornton was led away, he locked eyes with Harold. There was no anger there anymore, just a hollow recognition that his family's power had always been built on shifting sand. In the months that followed, Harold worked alongside a team of historians and archaeologists to identify as many of the victims as possible. Records were sparse, but through diligent research, they managed to name 28 of the 43 individuals found in the mass grave. The town council, now led by Mrs. Blackwood, who had won a special election after Thornton's resignation, organized a memorial service. The cemetery, once a place of secrets, became a site of reconciliation as descendants of the mill workers, some who had traveled from across the country after learning of the discovery, gathered to honor their ancestors. Rodriguez, who had stayed in town to document the entire process, approached Harold as they watched families place flowers at the newly installed memorial stone. "You know, some people still think the Thorntons got off easy," she said. Harold nodded. "Perhaps. But their name is ruined, their power gone. And these people," he gestured to the gathered families, "they have closure now. Some justice is better than none." "And what about you?" Rodriguez asked. "After all this time tending to this place, learning its secrets?" Harold watched as an elderly woman placed her hand on the memorial stone, her eyes closed in prayer. He thought of all the notes he'd read over the years, the little girl who had grown up visiting her mother's grave, the countless stories of love and loss that had unfolded beneath these trees. "I'll keep doing what I've always done," he said simply. "Caring for the dead, honoring their stories. But now, I'll be caring for all of them, the remembered and the forgotten alike." As twilight descended on the cemetery, Harold stood alone by the spring where it had all begun. The water still bubbled up from the earth, constant and clear, washing away the soil to reveal what had long been hidden. Like truth itself, it could be temporarily diverted or covered, but would always find its way to the surface. As the seasons changed, Harold settled into a new rhythm at Oakwood Cemetery. The scandal had faded from headlines, but its impact remained in the respectful way visitors now paused at the memorial. He no longer felt the weight of unspoken secrets pressing down on his shoulders. On this crisp autumn morning, Harold trimmed the grass around Sarah Miller's headstone, the little girl's mother whose grave had started it all. The cemetery had transformed. What was once a place of hidden shame now stood as a testament to truth and reconciliation. Mourning Mr. Harold called Mrs. Blackwood, now serving her first full term as mayor. She often walked through the cemetery before heading to her office. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Harold replied, feeling genuine contentment for the first time in years. Later, as afternoon shadows lengthened across the grounds, Harold noticed something unusual near the old oak tree, a small wooden box, weathered but carefully placed against the trunk. It wasn't there during his morning rounds. Curious, he approached and lifted the box. It was surprisingly heavy, with intricate carvings along its edges. A small brass lock secured its contents. Turning it over, Harold found an inscription on the bottom. "When the last Thornton falls, open me." Harold glanced around the empty cemetery, wondering who had left this mysterious object and what secrets it might contain about the town's oldest family. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you enjoyed this story. What do you think is inside the mysterious box? Share your theories in the comments below.